All right. Well, welcome to this evening's Budget Town Hall. The purpose of this meeting is to kind of provide a more open forum than may be available typically through the formal budget process and public hearings, because those aren't interactive events. So basically the purpose of tonight is just to make any kind of do a budget presentation directed to the public, and then also offer opportunity for engagement for any questions that the public may have. Essentially an open forum for the budget. So by way of quick introduction, there have been two presentations on the budget up to this point. There was an admin recommended budget on April 12th, and if you reference the YouTube video, you can skip right to that by going to 48 minutes and 30 seconds, as well as the tentative budget presentation that was presented on May 10th, and that's beginning at 31 minutes and 41 seconds. Both of those were presented with very different perspectives of the budget. The admin recommended budget was looking at the organization as a whole and trying to capture costs, not necessarily broken out by the fund, but more just organization-wide, and looking at our total employment costs. And whereas the tentative budget was a much more traditional approach to a budget, where we were looking at fund balances and revenue and expenses by particular fund. And so both of those would be a good foundation to understand the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. The next thing that I wanted to touch on was a digital budget book, and I'm going to go actually navigate to that right now. For those on YouTube that want to follow, I'm going to just basically show you how to get to that. So if you go to moabcity.org/budget, then it'll take you to this budget process page. And this is where it provides a kind of a scheduled outline of the budget process. And here we can see that tonight we're in the Moab City Budget Town Hall. Next Tuesday will be the formal public hearing on the proposed tentative budget. That's the last opportunity for public input on the budget process. And then we have two versions of the tentative budget. One is the spreadsheet form down here that has a comment field. And then up above that is our digital budget book. And this is presented in a kind of a more user-friendly format. Here you can see there's a budget overview, and that currently only contains personnel changes. As we move to the final budget, this is going to be expanded, and it's going to be a little more comprehensive of the budget as a whole. And then you can go into actual individual funds. Here we have, as you can see, General Fund, Class C Fund. I don't need to read through all of them, but starting with Water Fund, these are our enterprise funds. Water, Sewer, and Stormwater Fund. Those are all fee-based. So the users of the system pay a fee for those services, and those fees should cover all the costs of providing that service, from the operational costs to the capital improvements, as well as the debt service for previously funded debt programs. We also have a capital improvement page, and generally we put I think currently we have all of the enterprise funds capital projects in here. We don't have all of the general governmental capital projects, but here you can see all of the proposed sewer projects for this next fiscal year. We intend to issue some debt based on the rate study that was done, that was wrapped up a few months ago. And that included this bond package, which we're looking at doing some sewer improvements in the Birch area, the Tusher area, as well as the WRF outfall. We're also looking at doing increasing the facilities out at the WRF treatment plant, which will include a shop building construction, as well as this includes the debt service principal. We also have some water capital projects. That includes some ongoing stuff, as well as some things that are typically considered operational, but due to the dollar amount, the dollar threshold, that exceeds that capital budget requirement. So here we've got a fleet vehicle, we've got some standard water meter replacements, hydrant replacements, debt service principal, just like in the sewer fund, as well as just some regular capital improvements that are going to be done this year that we're proposing to be done, including a transmission line at the Desert Rose apartment, that's what we're naming it, as well as one at Emma Boulevard, and wrapping up our sewer or water bond project that we started a few years ago. One of the things, the final component of that hasn't been started yet is that Spanish Trail water tank. There's still some details to be ironed out on that. And then under stormwater, we have a Mill Creek retaining wall project just off of Main Street. So we're proposing that for the next fiscal year as well. Heading back over to the presentation, just wanted to talk briefly about the municipal budget process. So for those familiar who've worked for private companies, a budget is kind of a guiding document. And you know, if there's significant increases or decreases over what's anticipated, it's not a major problem typically. Whereas with a municipal budget, really, you know, most governmental budgets, especially in state level and below, it's actually a legal document that's adopted by the legislative body of the entity. And like by law, by statute, we are not allowed to exceed those budget allocations. Not necessarily on the line level, but on the fund level. So after the municipal budget also has a statutory requirement with very specific timeframes outlined in state code. And the budget process involves mandatory public comment periods. Like I mentioned, that will be this Tuesday, the 24th. And that's the public's opportunity to come and express what they would like to see as part of the budget for the next fiscal year. After the budget is adopted, to amend the budget requires really a similar process. So we are required to put notices in the newspaper and then conduct another public hearing if an amendment is required. That is typically done in December and June, just kind of at those regular intervals to catch up for the things that have happened that weren't anticipated at the beginning of the fiscal year. This town hall is not a required component of the budget process, but we feel it's a less formal format of a meeting, and it can allow for greater public engagement. And here's just kind of a brief overview of the next steps. So the budget is available for public view.
Hi, everybody.
The budget's available for public viewing currently, as I previously showed. And like I said, May 24th is the tentative budget hearing. And between that time and June 14th is when we'll prepare the final budget document. And this is where we incorporate all suggestions that were made by council and by the public during the tentative budget hearing. So the staff, as part of the budget process, we have an admin recommended budget, and that's where staff members recommend a balanced budget to the city council, and then we get the feedback on that, which translates to a tentative budget, and ultimately then we take the public input and we arrive to a final budget. So to prepare for this whole process, we conduct a strategic planning session with the city council, and we essentially talk about what the priorities for the city council are during that process. And what we've identified here are just a few. This isn't all-encompassing, but it's some of the kind of guiding principles that were used in the creation of this budget document. So community betterment was one of the things that floated to the top through this process, increasing the quality of life for our full-time residents. And while that may be vague, there were some very specific things that were included in the budget for this fiscal year that tried to accomplish that increase of quality of life. We also wanted to earn the public's trust in local government, and this included an increase in transparency of government operations. There are some very specific things included in the budget that will enable us to do that. Address housing needs for residents, and this is also a challenge for a local government to address. It can be done primarily on the policy level. It's not traditional for a municipality to undertake major projects that can increase that, but we're working on taking all angles to address that need, as well as noise pollution. That was a common thing that was discussed, and how we can go about making improvements in the community and livability in the community by reducing noise pollution. We also wanted to increase the quality of parks and recreation facilities, effectively manage water resources, and enhance the public safety budget in targeted ways to increase our overall levels of service. So I wanted to touch on three very specific things related to community investment. The first was capital infrastructure improvements, additional staff to support objectives that are set by council, as well as that component of the public safety and code enforcement. So touching first on the police department, there's some very specific things that have been included in the budget to bring about that increased level of service. The first is a domestic violence specialist. This is something that is a need that's been identified in our community, and we have proposed a budget to address that. Language translation services, a temporary housing allowance, and this is for our law enforcement officers. We increased the requested training budget allotment, providing a funding mechanism to bring about more nuisance abatements for properties that are in violation, being able to have funds set aside for towing abandoned vehicles. That's been a common thing that we've seen in the last year, as well as a significant investment in our software and records management. So next, we're touching on salaries and benefits by department, and this is not by fund. I want to point out this is kind of all staff across the board, and what we see in yellow are the new positions created. So kind of off the top there, a few different departments have some new positions created. Touching first on transit, this is as the city implements a transit program, it's necessary to have a coordinator to oversee that program, as well as a fleet mechanic, essentially increasing our budget allotment so that we can properly maintain all of our equipment. Half of that transit coordinator position will also be dedicated to seeking grant opportunities for the community, and that would fall under the engineering department. We also have a need for an additional building official in our planning and zoning department. And then our utilities department has a need for an additional sewer position, and so we've proposed that in the budget. There's a part-time, this is in the recreation department, a part-time parks worker. And then in public safety, there's a couple new positions, the first of which I already touched on, that domestic violence specialist. And then second was an additional code enforcement officer, as we try to kind of take a more proactive approach with some of the recent activity and increasing that what we're doing in that department. So I wanted to next touch on some of the major capital projects, and some of those are wrapped up in the Class C Roads Fund. Not all of these are significant projects, but some of them are. So we have our Emma Boulevard project, which is a parking project, part of the dispersed parking program, as well as the acquisition of a new street sweeper. Our current street sweeper has reached its end of life, and it's time to replace that, as well as the 100 West roundabout contribution. That's a primarily UDOT funded project, but the city is contributing a small portion to that. The rest are primarily ongoing operational costs that we do every year, such as the utility cuts and seal coating, as well. That includes the crack sealing on the asphalt to maintain the roads in good condition. We have a few major, this is our general government capital projects. A couple that I wanted to touch on here were the dispersed parking project. This is a big one that's everybody will see throughout the community in the coming year as we undertake this project. We're currently in the design process, and we have a demonstration area. We also have, most of these are actually ongoing projects and things that have already been in the works for quite some time. It just carried over into another fiscal year. One that I wanted to call out specifically was our dark sky compliance, and this is for our street lights and city buildings. We are nearing the end of the period for all facilities to become compliant with the dark sky ordinance, as well as the Pack Creek footbridge. This is the bridge behind the Episcopal Church. This is another carryover project. We have some capital projects in the water fund. Some of these we already touched on. All of them we already discussed, as well as same with the sewer utility funds. This is calling them out specifically. Those first three are part of a sewer bond package that we anticipate issuing in the next year. And the next to that debt service, as well as the shop building, we'll be using the fund balance to pay for. And here's a summary of our governmental funds as well as our enterprise fund and internal service funds. So I wanted to talk briefly about fund balance because this gets a lot of attention and a lot of people talk about rainy day funds at all levels of government. It's something that receives a lot of attention at the federal level, at the state level, and as well as at the local level. So by statute, cities are only allowed to maintain 35% of their revenue as a rainy day fund. The city's been put in a great position where we will be able to establish that for the fiscal year, the current fiscal year end at about 30%, which is about $4.7 million. And we anticipate, as we're not either using or contributing to in any significant way, we anticipate maintaining that 30% rate for the next fiscal year as well. So our sales tax revenue, I wanted to touch on how we projected our sales tax revenue for the next fiscal year. So we know at this point in the current fiscal year about where we'll end up, and you typically use that information to model your next fiscal year budget. And we wanted to be conservative with this because of the unprecedented situation that we've seen in the current fiscal year. So what we did was we took our fiscal year 22 actuals and where we anticipate, so our projected revenues, and we reduced that across the board, across all sales tax revenues by 3%. And as you know, where Moab currently doesn't levy a property tax. Our property tax rate is set at 0. Sales tax revenue is absolutely critical to be conservative and try to be accurate with. So that's why we did that. I wanted to talk briefly about these revenue sources. As I mentioned, sales tax revenue is our primary source of revenue for the city. So when you check out at a store, unless it's a grocery item, you will pay 8.85% of your total purchase towards a sales tax. And of that 8.85%, about 2.9% actually goes to the city. 1% is collected but distributed based on population. And Moab City collects relatively high sales tax compared to our population, and so we don't get that full 1%. We get approximately about 60% of that 1%. We also have this new Recreation, Arts, and Parks 0.1%, and this is the RAP tax, or ZAP tax, as it's known in Salt Lake City. And this is an exciting program that we will be working on next year to distribute. We've been collecting that for about a year now, and we'll be distributing some of those funds. And here we have the other tax components where Moab City is defined as a resort community, so we're able to levy an additional 1.6%, and 100% of those funds are distributed to the city of Moab. There's also a highway and transit program of 0.3%, which is distributed based on a similar allocation as that local sales and use tax, as well as a transportation infrastructure 0.25%, of which the city, that's distributed between the city and the county, and currently the city is receiving 0.1% of that. Wanted to review very quickly our current outstanding debt service. The city has issued a total of 8 bonds, 2 of which are water revenue, an additional 2 are sewer revenue, and the remaining 4 are sales tax revenue, used for various things over the course of the city's operations. And this is a quick calculation showing our debt service capacity as outlined by the Utah State Constitution. So currently we have $5 million of general outstanding debt, and we have a total allowable of $35 million. For water, sewer, and lights, there's an additional 8% allowed of assessed property value. So we have a total allowable capacity of $71 million, and we have $21 million outstanding, which leaves about $50 million of debt service capacity for those 3 things. I wanted to talk very briefly about the Stormwater Utility Fund because this is something that we're going to be seeing in the next year. This program currently has, this is an enterprise fund, so again, it refers back to those fees covering the cost of providing that service. The Stormwater Utility Fund currently runs a fund balance deficit of about $230,000. Because of this, so the city currently levies a very conservative stormwater utility fund fee. I think it's $4.50 per month per household. And as we undertake some additional projects and realize that there's some underfunded needs in that program, we've realized that it's time to address the monthly rate that's being charged, as well as potential impact fees that could be used to enhance those revenue streams and undertake some of these major projects that need to be done. The one major capital project is that Mill Creek retaining area just off Main Street. We anticipate that will come in around $400,000. I also wanted to touch on the recreation fund, the revenue and subsidies as part of these recreation programs. This is something that a lot of the community members enjoy, but it's important to understand what fees are covering. So when you go to the pool and you pay your fee to get in, how much is that actually covering the cost of going into the pool and swimming? And here we see that the recreation center has a program subsidy of about $600,000 annually. Our arts program has a subsidy of $340,000 annually, and our sports programs have a $360,000 subsidy. Just basically what this means is these are things that we charge fees for, but are also supplemented by general tax dollars. With that, I'll open the floor up to any questions. I appreciate everybody's time this evening. Here I listed my contact information. I've got my email address and cell phone number there, so anybody can feel free to contact me with questions you may have. I'm always happy to discuss the budget with members of the public, staff, council members, so you're always free to reach out to me. Do I have any questions from the public? Yes, we do have one question. If you could come up to the mic.
Do I have to say my name? I'm Joette Langanese, and I do have a question because last year when the city considered a property tax, a lot of concerns came from the community regarding staffing and the cost of staffing. So can you address for the public the increase in staffing and how you anticipate that to be reflected in the services that we provide? And I know that's not an easy question to answer, but I know that's something the community would probably be interested in hearing.
Yeah, definitely. So we did cover the 7 new positions in specific detail that we would be funding as new positions for this year. Cost of employment is a significant portion of all cities' budgets. Cities are labor intensive, and essentially, city budgets require the bulk of city budgets are split between wages and benefits to employees, as well as and then to capital projects to maintain those or to replace those significant assets that really belong to the community. And so what we're doing as we look at consider these 7 positions, it's important to understand how they enhance or fill a need in the community. And as you look at each one of them, we think about, say, code enforcement. There's some major needs in the community for code enforcement that currently aren't being addressed. And we hope that by filling those, we're increasing the level of service and across the board. That applies to all of the other positions as well, with the exception of like the transit coordinator. So that's a position that's essentially required because we're adding a new program. So all 7 of those positions are either increasing the level of service or they're, part of that new program. So does that answer your question, or at least begin to address it?
It does, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, with that, I think we'll wrap up for the evening. Thank you guys so much.